a caregiver to my mom who has depression and my older brother who has schizoaffective disorder with intellectual disability. I still grieve my adulthood.
And then my mom went like, just send me to the nursing home.
It comes with the connotation of abandoning the person, right?
We can think as caregivers stepping into a new job, and day one of the job you are expected to perform.
Every decision I made, right, I had to ask myself, okay, how will this affect Mama and Abang?
I think of the same thing. I have no siblings. I'm unlikely to have children lah. So, yeah, I think about it a lot.
Oh my God.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Pantang, where we talk about things sometimes people are slightly afraid to talk about, but here we're not.
Correct.
I'm Azurgo.
And I'm Fauzi. Today's episode is about something really close to my heart actually, where many in the Malay community grew up hearing tanggungjawab kepada ibu bapa, which is so relatable.
In Asian culture, honouring and caring for our parents is deeply valued. But in reality, balancing that with responsibility from work, finances, and our own lives can be challenging.
Especially when caregiving becomes more than just helping out. It becomes almost like this responsibility when it involves like health struggles, financial planning, or even long-term care.
Joining us, we have Hidayah, who has taken on the responsibility of caring for both her mother and her brother while navigating her own life.
Hi.
And also here we have Olivia Leong, Head of Community-Based Services at Caregiving Welfare Association, CWA, who will help us understand the financial and caregiving support available for families. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So here at Pantang, we let the cards lead our conversations. Let's just dive straight into the first question, shall we?
Let's go.
Question 1. What does it mean to care for your family while you're still figuring out your own life?
For context, I'm a program manager at Mindful Community, and Mindful Community, we service both caregivers and also persons in recovery as well. I'm a caregiver to my mom who has depression and my older brother who has schizoaffective disorder with intellectual disability. Very bombastic words, but schizoaffective disorder refers to when a person presents with symptoms of paranoia, which exists in schizophrenia, and hallucinations as well. And with bipolar disorder, they experience mood shifts of highs and lows. So my brother presents with paranoia hallucinations together with the mood shifts as well. So that's why we call it schizoaffective disorder.
And your mom?
My mom, she has depression.
So Hidayah, you look very young. I'm sure you are. You're trying to figure out, what you want to do, who you are, your finances, your career. And at the young age of 22, you had to take this responsibility of being a caregiver. What was that like for you?
I remember my first touch point with coming into this caregiving journey, right? I was actually 20 years old at that time, and I had actually just finished polytechnic. And I remember one of the random days, my mom came up to me and said, "Adik, you finished school already, right? Can you accompany me to your brother's appointment?" Next thing you know, in the doctor's room, I was helping my mom translate what she wanted to say to the doctor. And naturally, my disposition was someone that was very curious. So I also started asking questions during the doctor's appointment. Then from then on, the rest is history. Yeah.
So at present, I understand that you're married. What are the living arrangements like?
Right now, I'm actually living with my husband, and we have our own place at Woodlands. My mom and my brother, they are actually living at Bedok. This shift in living arrangements, right, was actually very challenging for me, because after 7-8 years of living with them, right, and then overnight we did not prepare for me moving out, getting married, having a life of my own. The first year of marriage was actually very challenging for me and my husband, because that was when my body started to unpack all of the issues that it was holding on together.
Would you say you are the only caregiver before you married to your husband?
For my brother and my mom, yeah, for sure. So for a good time of my adulthood, from 20 all the way up till about 25, I was what they call a primary caregiver. I handled my brother's finances, medical appointments, rehabilitation appointments. I even managed his workplace schedule, for example. I worked closely with his doctors. So really at that point in time, right, my life basically revolved around my brother and my mom. For lack of a better word, I didn't really have a life at that time,
I can feel a lot of empathy, and I would assume that you grew up faster than your peers, and I can only imagine how that was like for you?
Nothing prepares you for this sort of responsibility,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I think no matter where you are in life, it almost forces you to, grow up quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 31 this year. I started caregiving when I was 20, right? So more or less, I'd say I've been caregiving for 10 years, right? But I still grieve my adulthood because I did not grow up like my peers, right? My peers had the opportunity to figure out what they want to do, their career plans and whatnot. It was never tagged to their loved ones or their family members. But for me, every decision I made, right, I had to ask myself, okay, how will this affect Mama and Abang? One very good example was as a young adult at that point in time when you start dating, what's at the back of your mind is if I date this person, the person has to accept me. And on top of that, he has to accept my baggage, right? Which is my family members. So if he does accept it, then there's also the other question. If you get married, will his side of the family be able to accept me and my family, right? When you think of one thought, right, you start spiraling into multiple thoughts. And as a young adult at that time, it was really very challenging to get through all that. Yeah.
Did you almost feel when you were meeting people that it was your burden and you almost felt bad that somebody else had to almost not take over, but, whether they like it or not, being with you means being part of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, you guys will agree when I say that when you marry the person, you're not only marrying the person, right?
Yeah.
You're marrying the family as well. At one point in time, right, I remember, I think maybe I was about 23, 24 years old. I was set on, you know what, maybe it's easier not to get married. Maybe it's easier to just take all of this in myself rather than throw in another new factor into the mix, right? Because I cannot imagine how that will look like, right? So I started dating my husband when I was 20 and we got married when we were 25, right? Only 3 or 4 years into our dating, then I realized, okay, you know what? I think he can do it. I think he's set it for the long haul with me. And that took me years to try and accept, reconcile. Yeah, so it's really a process, I would say.
So I think I want to ask Olivia, right? You must have seen a lot of cases, and caregiving is also not one shoe fits all, right? It comes in different shapes and forms, dependent on, what the needs are, what the situation is. So for you, you've seen a lot of these, and I think nobody really gets prepared to be a caregiver. So for someone who, let's say, has found themselves in a situation like this, what are the easiest things that they can do to sort of learn quickly?
All caregivers have very different experience. So I think the experience that Hidayah has is very different from a caregiver who's caring for their mother with dementia or a father with stroke. So it's very important that if you land yourself into caregiving, what we want to start to do is really planning for caregiving. So if your loved one already has some pre-existing condition, it is very important for families to actually start their conversation early, where they are still okay to talk about some very difficult conversation like financial, like emotional, where do I put my parents, who is going to care for my loved one when they are really sick, when they are bedbound. So the conversations of caregiving should happen prior before the hospitalizations and the actual caregiving process. And a lot of times, like what Hidayah has mentioned, right, caregivers, young caregivers especially, while they are dealing with their own set of issues in building career, relationship, family, now they have this added on responsibility of like caregiving. It is very overwhelming. So a lot of times we can think as caregivers stepping into a new job. Right. And day one of the job, you are expected to perform without any probation.
This reminded me of one of the stories from my own caregiver that I'm currently supporting right now. She is actually a caregiver to 5 dependents in her family.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember what she shared with me, right? In spite of the fact that she's actually cared for 4 individuals in her family, when she had to actually care for another individual in the family, right, the entire learning process starts from scratch. Because this other dependent that she is supporting has very different needs. What she recounted to me was that no matter how many times I support my dependents in the family, it's very exhausting to be starting over because I'm starting over with different set of challenges with another different person. Yeah.
So to help the caregiver transit better, right, very important thing is that they actually look and navigate within their resources to see what works for them. Because there are so many resources out there, but it can be very difficult to make sense of it while you are in caregiving.
Yes.
If you are really having trouble with that, speak to your social workers, speak to trained professionals, just like Mindful Community or in CWA. We do have care navigators who will walk alongside with you, who will journey with you in this period.
Do you think in Singapore, a lot of people find it often very difficult to become caregivers without any preparation? Because with my family, we would assume that my parents would take care of themselves, but we are at the juncture of, oh no, they cannot take care of themselves anymore. We have to step in. However, we have our lives. Yesterday, I was having a meeting with my family. It was so difficult because it's almost like as if we are pushing our parents around to different siblings. And we are talking in a privileged standpoint. I can only imagine kids who are the only children in the family. Yeah.
Sole caregivers, right?
Do you think this is a normal occurrence here in Singapore?
So Singapore is moving towards a super age society, right? Where 1 in 4 Singaporeans will be aged 65 years old and above. So when the numbers of dependent senior increases, the numbers of informal caregiver or family caregiver increases. So this situation will not be foreign in the years to come.
You know, my family were having a meeting and stuff like that when we were searching online. I'm just very heartened to see that there are avenues, but it can be quite daunting when you see so many information, you're not sure what works for you and stuff like that. And then my mom went like, just send me to the nursing home. And we don't, that's a solution, but we want to take care of our family. Like, you know, in our Malay community, we always say, tanggungjawab kepada ibu bapa. But then at the same time, also, there's this burden. I wouldn't say it's a heavy burden, but you do feel it because you also have a life. So it's a very conflicting feeling, right? As I hear from you as well. So it's very relatable.
Question 2 would be, how did being a young caregiver shape your life? If you don't mind sharing, I'm sure there must have been many, many highs and lows in, you know, the years that you've been a caregiver. If you can just share with us, you know, maybe one of the toughest days or challenges that you've had while you were still living in the house with your mother and brother.
I mean, there were definitely moments in my caregiving when I felt at my lowest, right? And it has happened multiple times. Off the top of my head, I remember that when I was living with my mum and brother, every 7th of the month would be a challenge, right? And it's very unique. Why the 7th? Is because this is the time that my brother gets his payday. And for someone who has bipolar disorder at that time, he wasn't able to manage his finances because his finances was tied very regularly to his emotional regulation.
Okay.
Right? When payday comes in, he gets excited. He doesn't know what to do with the money. And as a result, he spends everything. And then after he has spent everything, he feels very guilty afterwards, very at a loss. Oh no, how am I going to survive to the next month, right? So every month we would be arguing with one another, up to the point I remember that I said some things to my mom that I still regret up till today. And at that point in time, right, I had no idea how to process my shame. I actually left house and didn't come home for 4 days because I had to process what had just happened, right? So that was one episode. And if I were to talk about my caregiving journey as a whole, I have 2 moments where I still experience grief, even as a young adult now, or rather a 31-year-old. On top of not having a normal adulthood, I did not have a normal mother-daughter relationship. My relationship with my mom was very much surrounded with my caregiving towards my brother. And we did not manage to connect on a mother-daughter level. We did not have mother-daughter dates. And of course, as I said, the other one was the grief over the fact that I did not have a normal adulthood. This can sound very taboo or very controversial when you say as a Malay Muslim. Sometimes I even catch myself wondering, I wonder what it would be like if I had went clubbing when I was 23 years old. Because this was the experience that my peers had, right? And I did not have that kind of experience.
Have you ever thought about, like, you know, options that would free you up a little bit more? Have you ever felt like, you know, why me actually?
I've met many caregivers who have shared with me that, why me? Why not somebody else? You know, why is my creator testing me? There were times definitely where I caught myself asking, why me, right? But then I have the opportunity to reframe it as, if not me, who else? But when we talk about other caregivers who do not have support systems, right? They will not be able to respond the same way that I did. For me, right, I am very grateful for my mom, in spite of the trauma that we had gone through, taking care of my brother. Because I remember when I actually got married, right, my mom didn't want me to be involved in any of the caregiving. Her mindset was that I should not interfere with Hidayah's life. I should let Hidayah have a life of her own.
Okay.
But because our relationship was so codependent, right, it was very challenging for me to learn how to let go. And the only way that I could learn to slowly let go was because of my therapist.
As much as you want to take care of yourself, you want to lead your own life, our parents are also living here on earth the first time.
Yeah.
And it's so relatable because even for my family, and I'm talking in a privileged standpoint, there's 5 of us taking care of our parents. But we still struggle because we weren't equipped with, preparation and even resources and stuff like that. Olivia, I wanted to ask you, how did it change your life? Because, you are helping families navigate through their caregiving journey.
I'm a community nurse by training. So I think before I step into the caregiving sectors or Caregiving Welfare Association, a lot of times for myself, I'm very fixated at the very formal referral support. I kind of had a caregiving plan for my parents and my grandmother. If my grandmother has like a serious condition, I think the next thing in place is, to get a helper. If the helper doesn't work, we will go to nursing home.
Actually, this was a service gap that we also noticed as well in Mindful Community. What we realized was that there's no service gap, or rather there's no service that brings families and their loved ones together to have conversations. Last year, we actually ran our pilot program called Bridging Hearts, where we actually engaged both the families and their teams to come together to talk about mental wellness, mental well-being, communication skills. And that's something that we hope will be able to benefit both the caregivers and the loved ones. Because ultimately, when we talk about caregiving and mental health, right, it's not a one-man job. It's a family unit.
I want to touch on something a little bit sensitive because we've spoken about, how you had to let go and how, you almost didn't have a choice but to take on this role. But that's you. Let's say if we were talking about an abused child, you almost can't blame the child as well. I think when we talk about filial piety, people always say no matter what, you need to care for your parents, you need to respect your parents. However, sometimes it doesn't work that way, right? And sometimes it's just not possible for some people. So when you face scenarios of which there are no willing caregivers who come forward, what do you do in a situation like that?
That's when we really need to look at other options, such as care facilities, right? Where the supervision can take place by a trained care professionals instead. So that would likely be in nursing homes. And there is such a misconception about nursing home.
It comes with the connotation of abandoning the person, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are real fear because there are real cases that happens where caregiver give up on their caregiving duties and leave their loved one in nursing home without much follow-up. In fact, when we were younger, I believe all of us has been in that conversation where your parents tell you, hey, next time when I grow older, don't ever leave me in nursing home unless you want to be ungrateful, right? So there are conversations like this that take place which actually structured our mind to actually think that nursing home is not a good place. That's when the government system has to come in place, where we will look at options, like my team of social workers in Caregiving Welfare Association. Something that we will explore is, the family members, they have a strained relationship, right? So is there any possibility that we can perhaps have the seniors or the loved ones spending their days in dementia daycare, right? And at night, right, you come home to care for your parents. The durations of spending the time is shortened, but much more meaningful.
Okay, now we're talking about our aging parents. What about us as a generation? I was just thinking about, I know in my situation, I'll be single, I won't get married. And I started thinking while taking care of my mom, I was like, oh my God, I don't have children.
I think of the same thing. I have no siblings. I'm the only child.
Right.
And I'm unlikely to have children. So Yeah, I think about it a lot.
That's why.
Take care of me.
It cannot.
Yeah.
I call you. We call the nursing home. Hi, Azura and Fauzi want to check in.
Together. So we're going to move on to the third question, which is how can communities better support caregivers without placing the entire burden on one person?
Loaded question. I think that it's a whole of society effort. The role that I do specifically at Mindful Community was I conduct these training programs for caregivers, and up till the last, I think, 1.5 years, we actually conducted what we call our C2C education program for Malay caregivers specifically.
Okay.
And what we realized with the Malay caregivers, right, is that these caregivers that come into the program, they are not all caregivers specifically. I have caregivers in the class, and I also have community caregivers in the class. These community caregivers in the class, right, they are really religious leaders, ustads. Ustads who actually come to the program and say that I've had caregivers who come to me and I see that they need medical professional help, but they insist on getting spiritual healing, which I do provide, but at the end of it, it either does not make any change or it makes it worse. These community caregivers are the very example why when we talk about caregiving, right, it is really not just on the caregivers and the loved ones themselves, but also on the rest of us to be able to look out for them.
It's so interesting because I remember when we were younger, right? We lived in a society where, okay, you go to level 6 and then the auntie will take care of you. And we always look out for each other. I don't know if we have become a society that is so inward to ourselves. I think that's something that we, you all can tell in the comments. You all let us know what you think. My question for Olivia is, for young people nowadays, if they find themselves becoming caregivers all of a sudden, what happens if they're not financially equipped for that?
Actually, Singapore has a fairly robust system in supporting caregivers. For example, home personal care, where we send trained healthcare professionals into the homes of their loved ones so that the caregiver is able to get some respite support for things like elder sitting, companionship, showering assistance, so on and so forth. These are all mean tested. They will assess your income, your family income, and then with that, there is a percentage, whether if it's 80%, 75%, and the total fee is actually deductible by that. A lot of community organizations actually extend their hand further to support through charity dollars. So, for example, I think like Mindful Community, they actually run free programs for the caregivers. For our organization, something that we do is that we actually provide fee waivers for families or caregivers who are unable to fork out of their pocket.
How expensive can all this caregiving support can be?
So if we are talking about private care, right, elder sitting support by a trained healthcare professional, it can go up to about $300 per 12 hours block.
Wow!
Yeah, that is a very high fee, right? So without this mean testing, it goes very high.
What I observe is that my mom's experience in terms of seeking financial help, right, was very challenging because it's not just about having enough resources, but it's also talking about access to said resources. I remember on multiple occasions, right, my mom would go out to seek help for herself. Right, she will go and apply financial aid. Time and time, it will get rejected. Yeah, but when I come in and I speak to the social worker, most of the time it gets approved because I am able to paint a very full picture and explain word for word what my mom and my brother are struggling with.
So it's not as simple as them looking at, how much money you have coming in, for example, that decides whether they help you or not, but it's also the full scenario of the situation.
Yes.
There's mean testing, there are avenues of financial help, but a lot of times we forget about the sandwich generation or the in-betweens who make a good amount of money to the point that people say, oh, you don't need financial help.
Right.
However, they also now have to pay for kids and pay for, let's say, the people they're caregiving for, and that reduces what they make greatly.
Yes.
Their financial costs or, liabilities increase by a lot. They are ineligible for help, but they are living in a way where they're almost struggling even though they're making that amount of money.
Yeah.
I would agree that the sandwich generation is in fact one of the most traveling generation. So try to communicate with your social worker. Try to communicate with people that are helping you, who are able to support you, listen to your story and help you to paint the picture so you don't have to do it yourself. So in some situation where the children's addresses are actually parked under the same IC, all the income will be accounted
I've had
inside
this
the
happen
main
to me
testing.
before. Yes,
Yeah.
I've had a similar experience, but it was very interesting because I was not living with my mom and yet my income was factored.
Yep.
And the social worker actually questioned me and asked me, why aren't you contributing to your mom and my brother? And I had to justify why, right? But more importantly, why is my income factored when I'm not staying at the same address? So this is like the little ways where caregivers had to learn how to advocate for themselves, right? And I think this is something that a lot of caregivers struggle to do.
Wow, I think, Hidayah, we can only imagine what you go through, right? It must be so tough. If you had to look back now, what kind of support do you think would have helped you most when you first became a caregiver?
I think I became a caregiver at 20, right? And when you become a caregiver at 20, it's very rare to meet peers of that age who are caregivers themselves, right?
Yeah.
I think what would have made a difference was to have another peer to relate to when you are a caregiver and you don't see visibility of people your own age, right? You don't have anyone to talk to about what are the potential sacrifices you need to make. Do you worry about your future? What is dating going to be like? I did not have that space, you know?
Thanks for sharing. I think it's something really commendable and that you are even, in the forefront of this caregiving situation. And Olivia, thank you so much for sharing what you do as well.
I think journey like Hidayah's reminds us that caregivers need support too.
That is right, whether it's through community conversations like this or even in the comments in our video, simply asking for help. No one should have to carry that responsibility alone.
Yeah, if you know someone who needs support, we've shared links to the resources in the description below. You can share it with them.
Thanks for watching Pantang. See you next time.
See you!
Bye!